Hello and welcome. I'm painting beaches again today, but this is actually not the first painting I painted this morning. In fact, the first one was rather a disaster, and I bet you'd quite like to see that one. In the interest of fairness, I think I'd like to show it to you too, because I wouldn't want you to think that I don't have bad painting days. I think it's an inevitable part of the painting process. So I will show you that in a minute. Right now you can see me sketching out the basic lines of that landscape before I set about putting in the lovely blues that are going to make up that precious beach scene. But I had something quite different in mind. I was inspired by this photo. So what I did was tape down a piece of paper to a board, which is a bit unusual for me. If you've been around here before, thank you for that, and you'll probably know that I like to usually just get straight on with the painting. But I do enjoy pulling off the tape, so every so often I make a bit of a concession. I had it in mind to go kind of abstract with this. So I knew I really just wanted to play with the colour and to work with those lovely soft wet and wet shapes. So I started there by putting a lot of clear water onto the line that I sketched out. And really the only sketching I needed was to put in the horizon line there. And I loved picking out these colours. So that's a bit of quinacridone gold, is that gorgeous yellow that I'm popping in there. And then the rest of it is going to be pinks and a couple of the violets that I've got in my palette, and of course some of the blues. And this is the kind of thing that works better when you're feeling very relaxed about the whole thing and making kind of confident brushstrokes and leaving them alone. Because if the surface is damp, those marks are going to soften out beautifully all on their own, and you don't have to do anything to them. And to be honest, they usually turn out better the less you fuss with them. But if you start overthinking it, which you'll see me doing in a minute, then you end up spoiling any of the lovely effects you get. And at the moment you can see I'm putting in some of the blues in the top section of the sky, and they're kind of mixed in with some of those purples and golds. So I'm happy for the colours to kind of mix on the page, and this is the kind of process that I really enjoy. It's why I love watercolour, for the colour mixtures that the watercolour paint will create so subtly all by itself. And you can see I've just popped in there one of my favourite violets. It's a very red violet. In fact, it's called Brilliant Red Violet, and it's going to be an important colour in this painting. When I look at it now, I can see already that I've got quite a lot of colour going on. I mean, it's kind of why I wanted to paint this picture in the first place, was to sort of play with the rainbow. And I'm moving around trying to repeat some of those colours, which is the blues and the purples, in some of the darker sections, which, if you recall from the photo, is kind of where the land is sitting, parts of the horizon and that kind of thing. So I've got some lovely deep blues in my palette, and as I'm working, the surface is drying, so as long as I can make a nice concentrated paint mixture, I should be able to keep a reasonably distinct mark on that horizon. But again, I'm happy for it not to be a perfectly crisp line, because in this sort of soft light I think a little bit of gentle edges is probably going to be quite a good thing. And so now the horizon has gone in, and that's kind of, well, it's really the main part of this composition, because it's such a lovely, simple image that's really all about the colour and the abstract. But the darks are always important, and I'm very mindful of that. For me, it's one of the problems with all the with watercolour painting, is that you can often have not enough value contrast. So it's something I'm often talking about in my videos, and it's something I think about with every painting that I create. So in this picture, the reference that I had, what I liked was in the bottom corner there was some nice strong warm darks. So those are the bits that I've got to put in next. So I'm looking at kind of working up a deep purpley colour. And I think I started out with that red violet and the pink colour that I used together. And that was a good colour combination. And I popped it in there, and there was that lovely, I love the way those sort of scallops that the waves make on the shore. And that was something I really liked about this picture. And as soon as I put that down, I thought, not sure about this. And there was some texture in the image, sort of footprints and things like that. So I started trying to put that in. And that was my undoing, I think, because I think this is where I took the rainbow a little bit too far, and I put in an Indian red, which I didn't like. I think it was just one colour too many. So I'm still thinking about it here, not enjoying what I've got going on, and I am trying to incorporate that colour in other parts of the painting, all the while quite concerned with what is happening. So what do I do but go to town with the sprayer? You'd be forgiven for thinking that that was hairspray, but actually it's clear water that I put in an old bottle that I'd recycled. Because when you've decided you don't like your painting, the paper has already been used up, so you've got nothing to lose. And in fact, this is something I talk about quite often. I will put links in the cards to another video about this, about what to do when you hate the way your watercolour painting turns out. I've got some other ideas in that video. In this one, I'm showing you that I took the opportunity to just spray the whole thing with water, and that'll make the paint move. You don't know what you're going to get, but if you didn't like what you had, it doesn't really matter. You may as well experiment and see what happens. So I've sprayed it and I've tipped the board, and all it's really done is taken away those bits in the foreground that I wasn't loving very much. You don't know what's going to happen now, so I had to let it dry. This really did turn out to be something of an ill-fated painting. I left it like this, where I didn't know what was going to happen, but I had kind of lost some of the parts that I didn't like by spraying them, and then I was tipping it around to see if maybe I liked the way it was as an abstract, just like vertical sort of stripy things, but I decided to go ahead and paint some more. Of course, the camera wasn't actually on when I did the extra painting, and that's my top tip for all you budding videographers out there today. Best to press that record button when you begin. So here is the painting in its current form. Obviously I didn't manage to capture the marks that I made once the painting had dried after that initial mad spraying that I did, so apologies for that. But let me tell you what I did. But first, let's pull off the tape, because that's always the best part, isn't it? If I can actually get it started. So when I was looking at what I had ended up being left with, I had lost one of the parts that I really liked, which was those scallopy bits with the sea. So that had been left nice and light. So all I needed to do was put in the dark in this bottom corner. And I did that using those, the violet colour up there and some of the pink mixed together. And I think possibly a little bit of quinacridone violet, which is really quite an oomphy colour. But I avoided that Indian red that had made me so unhappy in the first place. And that, because the light was already there, I could just put in the dark behind it, kind of negatively painting the sort of the part that is that kind of abstract wave bit. And then I remembered that I was enjoying the texture in the front, but I decided that I would, instead of using the Indian red, I would put it in with splatter, you know, flicking off the paintbrush, with some of the dark blues. And I had used those dark blues just to reinforce the darker values that I put on the horizon. I mean, I was kind of moving away from the photo. I never aim to reproduce a photo anyway, but I think this was making it look more like there might be land on the horizon and that kind of thing. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, at this stage, I was just playing, which is one of the great things that happens when you end up with a painting you don't like, because you can't lose, really. You can do whatever you want. Now, I've nearly pulled off all this tape, and it's come off pretty well. It's painter's tape, artist's tape, as opposed to regular masking tape. So it should be able to lift without destroying the paper. Sometimes we're unlucky, but today it was about time this painting had some luck, and apparently the luck was the tape. So there it is. I'm not sure I rescued it, but it certainly was still fun playing with the paint. So I think there's always something to be learned, even from a painting you don't like. You may as well keep going. Keep going until the paper gives up. That's what I say. Now, shall we get back to that painting that was going a little bit better? Why not? So, having failed to record the second and potentially more interesting half of fixing the dodgy painting, I did feel like I owed you a beach painting from start to finish. So this is the one I did second, and often you might need a warm-up painting to get going. And that's, I guess, what I considered my first painting to be. It's just the warm-up one. So I've gone in quite a different direction with this second one, back to traditional blues and daytime, and more of the typical beach scene as opposed to something a little bit more abstract. Although you'll see I'm still keeping it to just big loose shapes and certainly not trying to put in any detail at all. I've got that lovely scallopy thing happening with the water, which I've been so enjoying about painting these kind of beach compositions. So I've put in the sky and the sand at the bottom there as the two biggest kind of blocks of plain colour. And I say plain colour, but I very rarely will use just one colour. Both the sand and the sky have got multiple colours in there, and I'm lucky enough to have quite a few blues, and you might have seen there I had to get out my little piece of paper where I had swatched out the colours. I never do that. I'm not a colour swatcher. That feels like a waste of time, not fun painting for me. There's lots of people who love doing that, but I'm not one of them. But it is useful because when those paints, the blues, are dry in the palette, I can't actually tell which one is which. So I very often have to go back and see which one is actually that dark one, because it was very important that I got the extra dark blue to put in the dark sky on the horizon there. And there's a few little mountains that I'm going to get to, and that's why I did the sky first, so that the sky's got a chance to be dry before I add that middle layer, which is going to be the little bit of kind of a suggestion of buildings and trees just before the mountains. And I wet the part of the ocean there before I put in the paint, so that when I dropped in the various blues, and I've used 3 different blues in there to get the different gradations going, but the water decides where they blend, which I really love. And the other place that you actually need more blue, and I've used a purpley blue, it's a colour called lavender, which I really like, but I've mixed it with the same blue that I used in the sky, because it's the part of the wet sand where the wave comes in, and what you're really seeing is the reflection in that wet sand of the sky. So it is the sky colours that you want in there, but a little bit purpley is always a good thing, because it's still, it's that kind of shadow against the sand. And again, this is where watercolour is helping us out, because you can layer it, and with the transparency you're still getting the sand colour underneath while you're putting that little lavender shadowy bit for the wet sand over the top. And I like to repeat the same colour throughout the painting to give it a nice harmony, a bit of colour cohesion. So the same lavender ultramarine mix that I used for that wet sand piece are the colours that I'm going to put into those mountains. So there was a little pale mountain in the distance that I've put in first, and I think this is actually a photo of Cape Town. So that is lovely Table Mountain. So it is one of the few mountains that is actually almost straight across the top there. And I am doing my best to leave some of the white paper in the back in little speckly parts, because there's a whole lot of little houses and things which just look like white sort of dots. They're not perfect circles, obviously, they're little squares and blobs, so I'm trying to just not paint those bits of the paper, but trying to use lots of different colours, a few greens, some of the same blues that came from the sea, and of course those purples, because anything in the distance looks even more blue. It's cooler, so more purples and more blues to paint distant mountains and make them recede into the background there. Thank you for watching. See you next time.